if you just see Farage and Reform as English nationalists, which is, I think, how they're often portrayed, and I think, a lot of Labour MPs would see them as that, that's a big mistake.
This could be the end of Labour essentially being the biggest, most powerful political party in Wales, a position it has held consistently, not just since the beginning of the Assembly, but in the last 100 years. So welcome back, and we are going to turn our attention away from Westminster, although actually in a way which is hugely important for what's going to happen in Westminster in the next few years. It was prompted by a question from Rob Osborne, who's the national correspondent for ITV News in Wales. And
great surname.
I've known him. Great surname. I've known him for
spelt correctly as well.
I wonder if Rob is his actual name, or whether he's also called, Theseus or
Richard,
Sebastian or something. Anyway, but he's a very, very well-respected journalist in Wales, and also had some kind of great social media hits over the last few years. But he sent us a question for EMQs, and we thought it was a sufficiently important question he was putting to us that rather than doing it in EMQs, we would actually do it in the main podcast. So
not that our questions on EMQs aren't important, Ed.
No, but I think
you might be giving the impression that it's a kind of second-class citizen whose question doesn't make it to the main podcast.
To be honest, George, that thought never came into my mind until you put it there, and also in the minds of the tens and hundreds of thousands of people who listen to this podcast, which may have been ill-judged, but there we are. Rob Osborne, ask us a question.
Hello, both. You recently had a question about Scotland and the elections there in May. But Wales is also going to the polls that day, and I'd suggest the results here could be even more interesting. Labour, having been in power since 1999 and having won every election for a century, could slip to third place. The Conservatives could fall from the main opposition to fourth. So who becomes the biggest party? Well, it's a toss-up between Plaid Cymru and Reform, if you believe the polls. Quick spoiler alert here, just because you're the biggest party doesn't necessarily mean you'll be in power, but that's for another day. Wales could very well be the story in May. But why does it so rarely get serious focus or scrutiny on the UK stage? Is it partly because, unlike Scotland with its constitutional questions, there aren't many prominent Welsh politicians or journalists bringing that perspective into the national conversation? I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Well, it's a great question from Rob. And, I would just sort of say, Neil Kinnock, Aneurin Bevan, Lloyd George, there have been some pretty big, massively prominent Welsh politicians over the last century, as well as...
Okay, here's a quiz question for you. Who's the only Prime Minister to have been born in Wales?
Oh, I don't know.
Guess.
Go on.
Julia Gillard of Australia.
No, I would not have guessed that.
So David Lloyd George, who people often say, oh, he was born in Wales, was actually born in Manchester.
But on Rob's kind of...
We have, by the way, we're doing a quiz round, aren't we, at a great kind of Westminster fundraiser for charity in about a month's time. So we've been exchanging some questions that we might be asking. I might have blown that one now.
That's right. It's a quiz in memory of Chris Martin for Sarcoma UK. He was the Principal Private Secretary to a series of Prime Ministers, also was Head of Media when I was at the Treasury. So that is a good question. But on Rob's question, first of all, narrowly, on this journalist point, I mean, if you go back over the last 10, 15 years, John Humphreys, I hesitate to say Hugh Edwards, Guito Harry, there have been a series of big Welsh journalists in Westminster, although, and for different reasons, they are no more. But even now, Paul Brand, very successful award-winning journalist for ITV. He is a Welsh journalist who's kind of driving the news in the UK. But I think Rob is right that probably the constitutional interest in Scotland and independence, and the fact that you have the SNP as an avowedly leave the UK party, has meant that there has been more political focused and maybe more resource focused from BBC, ITV newspapers than into Wales, where Plaid, although they are the Nationalist Party, they always push away the idea that Welsh independence is their short to medium term goal. It's a long term aim, but they don't make that part of the here and now, and therefore Welsh politics is less significant usually for the composition of the UK going forward. Do you think that explains it?
I think it's partly about relative size, isn't it? I mean, Wales is smaller than Scotland. 3 million people live in Wales, 5.5 million people live in Scotland. But of course, these are themselves smaller than some of the English regions, like the northwest of England, where I was an MP. I think it's also that the Welsh economy is more fragmented than the Scottish economy. I mean, the Scottish economy is obviously, Edinburgh is completely different from the Highlands, but it's quite distinct from the English economy. Whereas the Welsh North Wales is very connected into the kind of Chester, Liverpool region, and Cheshire, where I was an MP, and South Wales is connected into kind of Bristol and so on. So, and journeys famously, across Wales are harder than journeys from Wales into England. So there's some of the economic geography. And I think you're right. The independence question. I mean, this is, of course, speaks to the history of Wales. Scotland clearly was an independent country until quite late, and there's always been this question of Scottish independence, and of course, a referendum on Scottish independence within the last 12 years. For Wales, I don't think anyone really thinks Wales has a long history of previously being independent, will become independent in the future. And so that kind of big constitutional question about the union, which, has been with us for a long time, because it used to be about Ireland, now it's about Scotland, doesn't really apply in Wales. And that might be fair or unfair, although I think maybe you could say it allows people to focus on kind of improving everyday life in Wales rather than these constitutional questions. Although I think an interesting feature of this election, which you drew my attention to, was that this is the Welsh Senate election, what used to be called the Welsh Assembly election, for the Assembly or Sennedd in Cardiff. They've actually changed the rules of this, and there are more Sennedd members. The voting system's changed, but maybe inadvertently this seems to have opened the door to reform. And the context of all of this is not just that Plaid, the Nationalist Party in Wales, are doing better, but as we said with this Caerphilly by-election, Reform are doing very well in Wales. And therefore, what happens in Wales could be prefiguring, to use our favourite word of this podcast this week, what's going to happen in the rest of the UK.
That's right. So let us take Rob's fundamental challenge, which is talking more about Wales and its importance seriously. As we said at the beginning of the podcast, there's a by-election in a week's time in Caerphilly, where at the moment the latest polls have Reform slightly above 40%, Plaid 2 or 3 points behind, neck and neck, Labour in the teens, the Tories and the Lib Dems behind again. An earthquake, because I think the last time that seat was fought, Reform only got 2% of the vote. I actually rang Rob yesterday and said, what is the big thing which we are missing of Westminster significance? And he said, well, it's not just that if these polls are right in Caerphilly and then next year in the by-election, this could be the end of Labour essentially being the biggest, most powerful political party in Wales, a position it has held consistently, not just since the beginning of the Assembly, but in the last 100 years in British politics. But also you could end up with, and it is true that the slightly unusual changes they're making in the voting system, they're going to move to a full list system. So everybody's elected off a list and with 16 super constituencies, but it's proportional, not 100% proportional, more proportional than it is at the moment. But in that system, Reform could now, next May, be the largest party. Although, as Rob said, the way Welsh politics works is it's very unusual to have one party win a majority. So therefore, it's always about coalition making. And if Reform is the largest party, but Plaid, Labour, the Lib Dems decide to go back to what they're used to, which is working together, you could hand over to Nigel Farage the massive PR opportunity of being the largest party in an election but being excluded from government by the establishment parties who block them out.
That's quite a kind of continental, that's a sort of continental European situation, isn't it? That you've seen in the Netherlands and elsewhere, where, and indeed in Italy, though not in recent years, where, the attempt to exclude the kind of, quotes, far-right nationalist party often ends in tears for the mainstream parties.
So it would be a gift for reform. He also told me, I hadn't realised this, that there is that reform are very Welsh orientated. A lot of the senior people around Nigel Farage in his team are kind of have Welsh heritage and pay a lot of attention to Welsh politics, and so therefore they're obviously on this. What is going on in Wales? Look, it's always hard if you are a Labour government locally with a Labour government nationally. Same with the Tories. It's harder if the national government is unpopular, and clearly Keir Starmer is unpopular. In Wales, you've had 3 first ministers changing hands in a short period of time. You've had kind of turbulence with the previous leader Vaughan Gething being kind of turfed out, having to resign over a scandal around donations. You've had some unpopular policies around imposing 20-mile-an-hour road limits. But I think the other thing which is really interesting, I'd forgotten this, that Wales voted for Brexit in 2016. It's very different from Scotland.
Big difference from Scotland, isn't it? And therefore the sort of political culture of Scotland, yeah.
So while Scotland is seen as being more left-leaning, there's always been a reform style vote there, more left-leaning, and voted for Remain. Wales voted to leave, always been a sort of more of a traditionalist, you could say small c conservative tradition within the Labour and the Conservative votes. And that is something which at the moment is playing into Reform's hands. And so, there is a sense that this is showing the kind of direction that you might be seeing in other English seats as well.
I mean, isn't it also, I think, a bit of a wake-up call to people like ourselves and Westminster, that if you just see Farage and Reform as English nationalists, which is, I think, how they're often portrayed, and I think, a lot of Labour MPs would see them as that, that's a big mistake, because their nationalism has an appeal in the kind of industrial parts of South Wales and the left-behind mining communities of the valleys and some of the more depressed parts of North Wales, and equally in Scotland. He does cross the border. It used to be said that kind of Boris Johnson's form of English nationalism or kind of Brexity approach didn't translate north of the border in Scotland, but Farage does seem to have purchase in both of these areas, and maybe we shouldn't really describe it as English nationalism. It's a form of kind of British nationalism, Britain first, our communities have been abandoned, neither of the mainstream parties have done anything for us, we've got to keep the foreigners out. I mean, I think it's a very salutary lesson if they are doing well in Wales, and the polls suggest they're doing pretty well in Scotland, although the SNP are on the rise in Scotland. They're clearly more dominant there, having been set right back in recent years with the problems that the nationalists had over various scandals and the result of the last general election there. So it's just a warning, isn't it, of what's coming.
It also lays down a big kind of challenge of political strategy for Keir Starmer and the Labour Party in Westminster, and the kind of relations and the election campaigns they're going to be fighting in Wales and Scotland, because there is clearly a disgruntlement and, as you say, a feeling of not having been listened to and things not getting better fast enough, and that's cost of living and the National Health Service and all those kind of things which Farage can feed into. And the strategy at the moment from Keir Starmer's speech is to attack Reform and to expose them for who they really are. But you have to be careful that if you're only negative, does that fully land when people feel as though they're not being listened to and they're not being engaged with? And if you look in the polling, I mean, it is true to say that Wales has always been less independence-minded. But if you look at support amongst young people for independence and for Plaid in Wales. It is on the up, and there is a very important set of polling which John Curtis did in Scotland, just came out a couple of weeks ago, pointing out that in Scotland, it's not just the SNP on the rise because there's disgruntlement about Labour in Westminster. There is also there has been a lasting increase in independence sentiment, particularly amongst young people in Scotland. Remembering back to some of the conversations we had, actually at the Inside the Room we did with Nicola Sturgeon, and looking at that, the run up to the 2014 referendum, and the lessons from that. I've never had a conversation with Gordon Brown about Scotland where he didn't go on at me about the importance not only of being negative but having a positive message. That you have to have a message which says Scotland will do better in Britain, and that Labour in Westminster, or the government in Westminster, wants that to happen. And the same thing may be applying in Wales as well. And if these elections are fought with reform emerging as potentially a big threat, in Scotland it would be reform, but also the SNP Plaid in Wales, and the political campaign is independence is bad, reform are dangerous, therefore you've got to vote for us, you've got to vote for the status quo. That wasn't a winning argument in the run up to 2014. Gordon would say, I think we probably accept there's some truth in this, that the moving to the positive at the end was important as well. And that as you kind of approach these elections in Wales and Scotland next year, what is the benefit to Scotland and Wales of being in the UK right now with Keir Starmer and this Labour government? And is that message being sold strongly enough? And is there enough sense of partnership between what happens in UK and in Scotland and Wales? And I'm not sure at the moment. It doesn't feel to me as though that is the message which is coming out of Downing Street.
And I don't think handing out flags with the Saltire and the Red Dragon and the Cross of St George at the Labour Party conference, as they did, and getting the whole crowd to wave these various flags of the Union is really enough of an answer. Anyway, very interesting. Rob, thank you for your question. Maybe we'll check in with you over the coming months to see how things are unfolding in Wales ahead of those Sennedd elections next year. And we'll obviously look at the result from Caerphilly in a week or so's time. But anyway, good to be out across the different parts of the UK and have a look at how all of this is impacting the Labour government in the months ahead.